making your own path is the key. One of the things that I learned years ago when I worked in the music business, I drove Madonna around for about a week while she was on the Vogue tour, and she
Oh,
told me that
cool.
when she had a new album coming out, she would make a list of what everybody else was doing to sell their albums, and then she would come up with something brand new that's not on that list, and then that's what she would do. And I've kept that thought like in my head ever since. And from a writing standpoint, I do that all the time.
Hi, everyone. I'm here today with JD Barker, and I am so thrilled. And what I can't believe is your publicist reached out to me. I was, I
She
was,
she is fantastic. I've worked with a ton of publicists. Is your audience primarily writers or readers?
they're both. Actually, they're
Both,
both.
okay. Because I might go off into the weeds a little bit here. When I first started publishing books, I reached out to Dean Koontz, who I've known for years, and asked him who he used. And he gave me a recommendation for a company in New York. I hired him on the spot, gave them an insane retainer. I think it was 20,000 bucks. And in that first month, they got me 2 blog reviews and like one, like website and a mention in a magazine. It was like nothing for $20,000, and there was no way to hold them accountable. So over the years, like my publicist model has changed, and right now I've got everybody on an a la carte basis. So I give them a list of everything that they can get, and I give them a price point. Like for a podcast, you get paid this much. For a magazine, you get this much, and they can work as hard as they want or as little as they want. I don't really care, but I pay
That's
them for the actual
brilliant.
results. And this woman, she's out of the Philippines, but she is phenomenal. Like she is just all over it. Every time I've got a new release, everybody seems to know about it. So she's been great.
It's funny. So I get the email, and I'm like, "Is this a scam?" Because I know, which was because what was super weird. This was the book that I was reading at the time when I got the email. So
Okay.
I'm like, that's
That one's
strange, right? I thought that's strange.
I'm suspect of every email I get now. Like I probably get
Yes.
like 10 to 20 like fake ones a day. And, and it kills me because I'm probably hitting delete on like some real opportunities because they just don't know any better. The only distinguishing factor that I've noticed is they all come from Gmail. I don't know why, but like every
Oh,
single one of them seems to come from Gmail. And for most of the part, the people that I deal with, they tend to have a domain name behind their name. But it's a mess right now. It's hard to tell what's real and what's not.
so I called up Mark Leslie, who you've spoken to. I listened to your podcast just this morning with him, and I'm like,
Oh,
"Is
okay.
this for real?" And he goes, "I think it is." I was so chuffed because obviously I'm a huge fan. Like Mark and I connected over loving horror, and you are a horror author. And in fact, your career, I admire your career immensely. Like just you have just managed to like your connection with Stephen King and your collaborations with James Patterson. You've somehow find the zeit you found it. You found the zeitgeist. You're in there.
I tend to get in front of a lot of people and bug the hell out of them till they either agree to work with me or they issue a restraining order. It's usually like one or the other, but I try to get it done.
I
I learned a long
absolutely
time
love
ago
that.
if you don't ask the question, you're never going to know the answer. I'd rather hear somebody say no, than not ask that question at all.
I found that if you don't ask the question, you never get anywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I used to teach at Thriller Fest quite a bit, and like if you go to Thriller Fest, you're gonna eventually end up in an elevator with some famous author. You've got 15 seconds to either make some kind of introduction and get to know them a little bit, or you can stand there and stare at the numbers and watch that the doors open and that person walk away. And I am not the kind of guy who's ever watched somebody just walk away. It's just the way I've grew up. My parents taught me that, and I worked in business for many years. And when you talk to people that have started a business from nothing and turned it into an IPO and brought it public and all that, like they chase every possible opportunity and they fall on their face way more times than things work out. But the key to it is they just keep trying over and over and over again.
I absolutely love that. So let me talk to you about a story that you told that I was like, oh my God, my people. You were saying that when you go to cons, you don't actually like sitting behind the desk selling books. Instead, you choose to give your books away for free.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that got me in trouble a little bit at Author Nation because everybody else is there selling their books. But I'm in a very weird situation. So I've got my own imprint at Simon and Schuster. So basically my own publishing house, but they handle my print sales and distribution, which means my costs are very low. So I can produce a hardcover for next to nothing. I mean, it's a fraction of what I was paying when I was working through Ingram Spark and the usual players. And I've got books sitting in the warehouse, because we tend to overprint. I've got a title coming out, we'll run 50, 60, 70,000 copies. eventually the dust settles and I'm on to the next title, and I've got these books just sitting in a warehouse somewhere that I can either pay to continue to sit in a warehouse or I can find something to do with them. So I've learned over the years, like if you study the indie mindset, like what indies tend to do, they always tend to be ahead of the curve. And one of the things that indies have done from for the longest time is they give away the first book in a series, as an ebook. A lot of times it's a lead magnet. Sign up to my mailing list, you get this first one for free, and you're basically a glorified drug dealer. You're hooking them with a little bit of a taste, hoping that they're going to come back for more. But I just kind of took it to the next level, and instead of giving away an ebook, I gave away hardcovers at Author Nation, and that's what I tend to do now when I go to places. And if you put yourself in the customer's standpoint or the reader, they come to these things, it's awkward. They're walking through that room. You've got all these authors sitting at tables staring at them, with that "please buy my book" look in their eyes. They're afraid to come to your table because they don't want you to actually, force that issue. They see a book they might like, they might want to read the back, but they don't want to close that 5 feet of distance because all of a sudden they've committed. So instead I put, one book in everybody's bag. They get it for free. They all come to the table, which gives me a nice long signing line that keeps me busy. They walk away with that free taste, and ultimately most people end up buying one of my books after that. So I've kind of incorporated that into the business model.
Literal genius. So I'm sort of at a different stage in my writing career, obviously, but I was sitting at one of the signing tables at World Fantasy Con last year, and it was like the most like I had Tim Wagoneer next to me and some cult author here and Asia Young next to me, and I was like the no name. And it was a horrible way to feel. And exactly, I felt like, what am I doing here? Just hoping somebody comes to my table. And I felt awkward, so much so that I took my suitcase of books and I crawled under the curtain behind me and did a Mission Impossible out of that room because I'm like, I cannot stand this. This isn't for me. But your idea of giving something away, that could work for me because I can promote other people's books and I can certainly give things away for free. But sitting there going, buy my book is very awkward. You nailed it.
Well, you're never going to sell enough books to make a difference, right? Like, when I used to sell books, first of all, I just kind of want to preface all this stuff, your listeners are going to hear. I've only been at this for 11 years. So I've done some crazy stuff in my career, but it's only been 11 years. 11 years ago, I had 0 people on the mailing list, 0 books out. I've made a lot of choices that have kind of raised the boat a little bit. But, if you go to one, and I used to go to these things all the time, and I was happy if I sold 5 or 6 copies, like that felt like a win. But, you're spending 5 or 6 hours or 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever doing all of that. And it never seemed to make sense to me. And like, I
That's
tend to look
right.
at those situations, try to figure out what's not working. Like even if you sell 100 books at one of those things, that's not going to move the needle as an author. You need to bring in big numbers. So like Author Nation, I think I gave away 2,000 or 2,200 books. All of those people went home and read it. A good chunk of them started buying my other books. Like that's how you move the needle. That's how you increase your readership. You got to approach everything, I think, as a business. You're selling a widget, at the end of the day. So, how are you going
Yes,
to get people to
sir.
come back and buy your next widget?
And time in, I always think about sitting at that table and your hours, you might have paid for the table. So thank you. I thought that was wonderful. And then I also found it really interesting what you said about cons. So I found cons have been a great way to sort of get my name out there, start people talking. I found an agent, I then left that agent, and then I'm now working with Blackstone as well with Brendan
Mhm.
for something for anyway. It's been great to meet people and get connected. But then at what point you were saying sometimes the cons stop being useful?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's curious.
Well, I started, I think my first big con that I went to was the Writer's Digest conference. That was the last one I went to before I got a publishing deal. So before things really started to break for me. And I learned a lot going to a lot of these things. But, everything seems to be geared towards that early author, trying to get that first book out there. I was on the board with ITW, the International Thriller Writers. And I used to go to Thriller Fest every year. And, one of the things that I learned, particularly being on the board, everything is just geared towards 2 groups, towards the debut authors, the people that are up and coming, and towards the big names. And like, unfortunately, everybody else in that con, they're somewhere in the middle. So there's really nothing. You can only hear like how to write a compelling first sentence so many times, and
So
it
true.
just it stops working. So one of the things that actually attracted me to Author Nation is Author Nation. I feel fills that void. They teach authors, okay, now your first book is out, it's done. This is how you get to book 2, book 3, book 4, and you raise your profile from here to here to here to here, and do it over time. In the traditional world, they really try to hit it out of the park with each book, and if you don't, you're kind of written off and forgotten. The problem with that as a business model is it's not sustainable. If you have sales that do this, they're going to do this on that next book. And now all of a sudden you're chasing that peak with every single title. But if your books come out and you're just slow and steady and you're just kind of doing this and getting a little bit more each time, selling a few more copies every time you put a book out, you're building a very solid base beneath you. And that's what's going to really sustain a career.
That's amazing. So guess where I'm going this year?
Author Nation.
Author Nation. My last couple interviews were actually with Joe Solari. He
Okay.
got talking, and we ended up with I had two full interview sessions with him, and he's phenomenal. And I'm so excited about going. So actually, it's like my 20th wedding anniversary with my husband, and this is where we're going for it. I'm dragging him with me.
Dragging your husband to Vegas.
Well, I guess it doesn't sound that bad when you put it that way, but
No.
yes. But yeah, I'm very excited about sort of learning more and figuring out just how to hit the next few levels. It's such a dark sea, isn't it? Like
Well,
trying to find.
Joe is he's very unique and when it comes to this too. Somebody that's actually on the other side of it, putting the conference together because he's thinking about every one of these authors. Like he knows all of them personally. He knows what they're looking for, what they want to see, what they don't want to see, and he incorporates all of that. And if you sit down, at a board meeting for ABC conference over in this state, they're not thinking about that. They're looking at what they brought in last year, how many people came, and how do we top that number? How do we get our beverage costs down? How do we do this? How do we do that?
Yeah.
Very little of those conversations are about what do these people actually need and want, and that's how you attract the crowds. I mean, that's why Author Nation is just so big. I mean, a couple thousand people all in one spot is insane.
Are you going this year?
I am, yeah. I got roped in.
Hey.
I'm the one who brought Andy in, Andy Weir.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Joe's been hitting me up for my little black book for my Rolodex. So last year I brought James Patterson, and at the last minute he got sick, which was horrible, and we had to do it live over Zoom. But this year we've got Andy Weir, and we've got some pretty cool ones lined up for the next go around too.
You know what? I'm gonna have to buy you a drink and hunt you down. So hopefully I will bump into you in that elevator.
I will gladly take the drink.
Okay, very good. And then something else that you're doing where my heart truly is I love how you're working on the TV to film adaptations because I mean that's where I want to go. So when I interviewed Robert Sawyer, he was like, between you and me, the dollars is in writing for television film. For every cent you make per word in that book, you're going to be making dollars. And you're there now, aren't you, with your 4MK series?
I've got 8 different projects in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell.
Whoa, Hollywood hell.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, every time my film agent calls me, it's like a roller coaster. It's either really good news or really bad news. Like there's no in between with those people. But yeah, 4MK, we've been working on that one. This is actually option number 4. The book came
Oh,
out almost 10 years ago. It's been optioned 3 times prior to this. For those of you who, people listening, Sylvester Stallone's company just picked it up, Balboa Productions. We just announced that I guess about a week ago. The press release came out, and they brought in a phenomenal team. He brought in a woman named Channing Fleming, or Channing Powell, I'm sorry, and she used to be the showrunner for Walking Dead. Yeah, she came in as showrunner and lead writer on what we're calling 4MK right now, the 4MK series. And why that's important to me is there's basically 2 different storylines going on at once. If you read the 4MK thrillers, I've got the current modern day police procedural happening, but then we do flashbacks to the killer through diary entries, and we basically see him as a child and as what a normal kid into a serial killer over years. But because we've got 2 separate storylines going on, we've never been able to figure out how to incorporate that on the screen. One of the very first conversations I had for that book was with Ron Howard and his partner. And they
wow.
started telling me immediately everything they would have to take out of the book in order to get it up on the big screen and get it down to a 2-hour film. That the diary entries have to go, these 2 characters need to be combined, like all this stuff has to go away. But now with streaming series and the ability to tell a story in 8 to 10 episodes, you can get that full book out there. So what Balboa's company is doing, or Stallone's company, is they're looking at 1 book per season. So we've got 3 seasons with the original trilogy, and then spinning that off into another series that features the serial killer, which kind of dovetails into my prequel books that I've got coming out now. And the woman that they brought in, Channing Powell, like she's perfect for this because anybody who watched Walking Dead, like they branched that off into so many different directions, and all of it was perfectly interconnected. So we needed somebody that could do all that, and she's fantastic.
That's phenomenal. So it's definitely a go then. This is gonna, I mean, I know
It's as
apparently
much of a go as every other one of my projects. But the
yeah.
thing is, with this being option number four, like this is the first time where I really feel like it could get done. I've got friends that know Stallone, and he's just one of those people. Like he would not have taken the project on if he didn't think he could get it over the finish line. And he seems very excited about it, which is fantastic too. So we'll see.
And this is going to be your first project to actually hit the screen, right?
I think I've got a couple other ones that are moving a little bit faster. I've got a feature film in the works for Behind a Closed Door. They're already on, I think, the third or fourth draft of the script. So that one's moving pretty quick. I think they're talking to directors now. A Caller's Game is at another studio. Dracul keeps getting picked up by different places. I wrote a prequel to Dracula for Bram Stoker's family.
Right.
Initially, that was picked up by Paramount with Andy Muschietti attached to direct. But I'll give you an example of what basically happens. So when we got that phone call, the book was basically went to auction on the film and TV side. There were a couple studios that wanted it, but then Paramount said, "Well, if you give it to us, we will attach Andy Muschietti, who did It for Stephen King and a bunch of other really cool projects." So we were like, "Yes, yes, yes, do that." But the reality of that is they pick it up. It ends up on a list over at Paramount for Andy Muschietti. So every time he finishes up a movie, he looks at that list, which is extensive, and says, "I'm going to work on this one next." And if he doesn't pick yours, you get pushed back off to the side, and he does this next movie and the next movie and the next movie, and like Paramount re-upped that option I think 3 times. So we were basically stuck there in limbo for that entire time, and that was eventually released, and now another company is looking at it as a streaming series. So you never know, what's going to work out and what will.
But at least I guess it's good income, right? That's something Jonathan Mayberry said. If you at least the auction keeps the money flowing, right?
That's one of those things. If you talk to any veteran author that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years, they're going to all tell you that the option money, like, it doesn't matter if it gets made or not, those checks are phenomenal and they keep coming, and it's true, they keep coming. One of the things I've noticed is when something gets optioned once, the second it's available, everybody just jumps on it, and like they may not even know what it is, but like the studios, the producers, all these people, like they see that as a hot commodity because so and so just had it, now it's available, we need to get it into our stable before somebody else gets it. So if you make a little noise and they're watching what you've got going on, they'll keep doing that. Yeah, so sooner or later, I'm sure something is going to make it to the screen for me. It's kind of a numbers game at this point. But as an author, like all I do is just put my head down and I just write the next book.
That's the smartest advice, isn't it? That's what you always hear. Just keep writing.
It's the only thing you can control, as an author. Like that book is yours. You can put out as many of them or as few of them as you want to do. Nobody's going to stop you. But the second you hand it off to other people, even for like your publisher takes and makes an audiobook, like that audiobook's not even your project anymore. Now it's the narrator's take on your project. So when it goes to a studio or something for film or TV, like it could be completely different. It could fall flat on its face. It may do well. You never know. But like the written word, whatever ends up in that final book, that's 100% you. So nobody can take that away from you.
How did you start? Did you start with short stories or did you jump right into the full length?
No, I started, I was told at a very early age you can't make a living as an author, as a writer, yeah, and I would have to get a real job. Like that was coming from my parents. So I went off to college. I got multiple degrees and I ended up working in finance. But when I was in college, I worked for RCA Records and BMG Distribution, and I was essentially a glorified babysitter. So if a recording artist came into the South Florida area, I'd have to pick them up at the airport, get them to the radio stations for their interviews, get them to their concerts. I would basically chaperone them around for a couple of days. And I had some very famous people in the car. And at the same time, I'm in school, which was expensive. So I realized I'm going to start interviewing some of these people and sell those interviews to offset the cost of going to college. So I sold stuff to like Teen Beat and Tiger Beat and Teen People. Like these were groups like New Kids on the Block and Tiffany and Debbie Gibson, like way back in the 90s. But that's kind of how I broke into the writing world. Because when you work for a newspaper or magazine, everybody that you work with has a novel at some stage of development in a desk drawer somewhere. It's 400,000 words long. They've been working on it for 10 years. It's almost done. I became the guy that they would show those to because I was really good with like grammar and punctuation and developmental suggestions. That kind of turned into a side hustle for me as a book doctor and a ghostwriter. So while I was working in the finance world, I was helping other people rewrite their books and get them published, working with agents, with editors. I did that for 23 years, and over that time frame, I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times list that all came out with other people's names on the cover that I had essentially written, which gets old after a while, and that's when my wife and I decided to pull the trigger on becoming a full-time author, and that was 11 years ago.
And this is why you're such a great collaborator. So I'd love to talk about what you're doing with other authors. The fact that you mentor them and bring them up. I think it's you call it Hampton Creek Press, right? Is that your
Yeah, that's my little publishing house with Simon and Schuster. Yeah, so I spent all those years working with other people on their projects. When I actually sat down to write a book by myself, it felt weird. I'm so used to working with other people in the room. And it's just a skill set you develop when you're working with others. So I missed that when I started writing on my own. So I started mentoring a lot of authors and working with other people. I wrote that prequel to Dracula with Bram's great grandnephew Dacre Stoker.
novel?
So that was collaborative. James Patterson and I have been working together for I think 7 or 8 years now. Very collaborative, and it's a cool relationship because I've worked with so many different people. He's worked with so many different people. We're both very versatile when it comes to that. So we can kind of change up the process as we go. And I don't think we've written two books together in the same method yet. Like everything, like the first time I made him pants it, like we literally had no outline on the book, just went back and forth chapter by chapter. The second book, he gave me an outline to show me, in his mind, how much better that process was. He was right; it was better with an outline. It was faster. So I've had a ball doing that. But meanwhile, while I was writing my own stuff, I was mentoring other authors, and in typical indie author fashion, I charged people for that. I forget what the dollar amount was, but it was a decent amount every month. And I did that mainly as a gatekeeper, to keep out the people who weren't serious about becoming an author. But I always felt icky about having to charge people. So when I signed the deal with Simon and Schuster, and working with Jim, I knew I wanted to do co-authored titles. So I started merging the two programs together. So instead of charging authors and mentoring them, I find authors that have what I call the storyteller gene. They know how to tell a good story, but they're missing something. And a lot of times I can pick up on it. I'll read one of their books and I'll be like, oh, they're doing this, or they're doing that, or whatever it might be. A lot of times that holds them back, especially as an indie author, because if you've got a problem with your writing and you're in the traditional world, an agent is going to tell you what's wrong, an editor is going to tell you what's wrong, the people behind that person, somebody's going to tell you what's wrong, they're going to help you fix it, and it's going to get worked out of your writing process. But if you're an indie author, you don't have that. You're hiring editors, you're hiring all these people, they're not going to really tell you what's wrong. So a lot of indie authors tend to write to the best of their ability, but that ability never really improves. They keep doing that same mistake over and over again. So I look for that one mistake, and if it's something that I can fix, I bring them in as a co-author. I work them through the writing process. I teach them how to overcome that, how to get past it, and then ultimately we put the book out through Simon and Schuster, which is great exposure for any author. I'm in about 150 different countries now, 24 different languages. So when that book comes out, the next time they go to an agent, they've got that track record behind them. That agent can pull them up. They can see, well, they've sold books in Russia, they've sold books here, they've sold books here. So that makes them that much easier of a sell if they decide to go into the traditional world. So it's a win-win for everybody.
How does somebody, Angelique Fawns, get to work with J.D. Barker? What are the steps?
Honestly, all you have to do is ask. Like a lot of times people are hesitant. Nobody asks the question. Typically if somebody asks, I look at a writing sample, see if they have something in there that I can work with, figure out where they are career wise, if there's something that I can help them with. It has to be somebody that I feel like I can take to another level. That's a big part of it. And the other piece is I'm always looking for something new and original. Like I wrote a book called Heavy Are the Stones with a woman named Christine Daigle, who in real life, she's a neuropsychologist.
Oh,
So she was
cool.
able to bring that skill set to the writing process. And, as an author, I can fake my way through it. I can do a bunch of Google searches, watch a couple of Netflix documentaries, and I can kind of pull it off if I want to. But having an authentic voice in the writing room that can bring in something that I, don't have up here, that's huge. Anytime you work with another person, you're going to end up creating something that neither of you could have created on your own. So that's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. Somebody's got to come to me with, a decent writing style behind them, something that, may be working, may not be working, but can be fixed, and an idea that I haven't heard before. And that's the hard part.
I've got to say, I'm very excited for all your new projects coming up.
I'm having a lot of fun.
You have done some phenomenal things, and I love hearing stories like yours because I do get very tired of it's impossible, the publishing industry's broken, nobody can be a full-time author, and you're living proof that that's not all true. You've just had to make your own path.
Making your own path is the key. One of the things that I learned years ago when I worked in the music business, I drove Madonna around for about a week while she was on the Vogue tour, and she
Oh,
told me that
cool.
when she had a new album coming out, she would make a list of what everybody else was doing to sell their albums, and then she would come up with something brand new that's not on that list, and then that's what she would do. And I've kept that thought like in my head ever since. And from a writing standpoint, I do that all the time. To give you an example, my last book was called Something I Keep Upstairs. It was a haunted house story, but the house at the basis of the story was real. It's a real haunted house. It's right off I live on a little island in New England, and it's right off the coast of the island where I live. So in order to promote that book, I came up with this crazy contest. I gave away an overnight stay in the haunted house to one reader. So we put out a press release saying author giving away overnight stay in a haunted house to one reader. They're going to get to pick up three or take three of their friends. And ultimately, when that came out, I got a ton of press. I did television, I did radio, podcasts, and it was in a lot of print. People were chatting about it all over the internet. Like, I'll do it. Will you do it? I won't do it. I'll do it if you do it. But all of that was essentially free. It's free noise, free buzz, and it sold a ridiculous number of books. So like as an author, that's what you have to look for. Now, somebody else can come along, they can give away an overnight stay in a haunted house, but it's not going to hit as hard because I've already done it. So the tricky
Right.
part is you've got to come up with something that nobody has done before. And just like with the book, I think the book needs to be an idea that nobody has done before. A lot of authors tend to skirt what's already been written. They tend to chase other authors. They look at what other authors are doing to sell their books. They do those exact same things. And the problem with that is you start buying Facebook and Amazon ads and doing the same stuff that this person over here is doing. You're never going to excel beyond what that person is doing because they're both doing the same thing. You need some kind of catalyst that's going to take you off into the stratosphere.
That is genius. Well, on that, I think I'll end this interview.
You can learn more about JD Barker at jdbarker.com, and I know I'm going to dive right into his 4MK Thriller series because I cannot wait for the TV adaptation. Thank you for listening.